In today's video, we have the latest trade talk from around the NHL, including some talk around the Calgary Flames, Nashville Predators, Philadelphia Flyers, around the Toronto Maple Leafs as well. We're going to be analyzing the Austin Matthews contract a little bit further, plus what it means for the William Nylander pending negotiation as well. We also have a word of a few players retiring, and more talk about there being a good chance we see a 2025 World Cup, Olympic participation, and so on moving forward for NHL players. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and of course some trade rumors to take a look at here today. Before we get into the trade rumors section, I do want to start first with some news we came late yesterday. I know I seen, but we didn't discuss it yesterday, that there is talk from Bill Daly, of course, the Deputy Commissioner of the NHL, that we likely are working towards a real good chance that we'll see a World Cup of Hockey in 2025. Of course, right now the NHL is doing the media tour over in Europe. I know we've seen Sportsnet's Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick doing tons of interviews and all kinds of NHL stuff happening over in different parts of Europe. I know they're in Sweden right now. And Bill Daly did put out some information yesterday talking about how the NHL, along with the Players Association, are working together, working hard to try to get to the point where we can announce, hopefully, it'll probably be a little while before it's confirmed, but a World Cup of Hockey for 2025. Now, of course, they were hoping to have this in 2024, and they postponed it. I think that was largely due to the fact of the conflict going on over in Russia. I think they'd ideally, in a perfect world, like to have Russian players participate, but right now with all the sanctions and everything against them, it kind of makes it hard to do. But he did say that it would be possible that it might only be NHL players participating. It might be mostly NHL with some European, but of course the problem with the World Cup of Hockey is being that obviously all the European leagues kind of have their own schedules, and they may not want to all agree to kind of shut down and send all their players. So it's difficult to say exactly who all participates. But at the end of the day, I personally would like to see them try to figure out a way to have the top Russian NHL players in the tournament, because without them, it's really hard to say it's a true best on best. I do understand right now why they would be, reluctant to do that. But, it's just not the same kind of tournament without that kind of team there, obviously. So we'll see what they figure out. But he did also indicate that this would be like setting things up so that we can anticipate a best-on-best international tournament every second year from there, because obviously after 2025, he'd be followed by the 2026 Olympic Games, which obviously he said that they're aiming to have NHL players participate in. And then from there, they'd likely have a 2028 World Cup and then the 2030 Olympics and so on. So you'd have back-to-back years to start, 25, 26, but every 2 years after that. So that's good news. I think it'd be great to build the game, build the sport around the world. And I really am looking forward to hopefully seeing this put together, because it's been way far too long since we've had true best-on-best international competition amongst the hockey world. There's still all kinds of players that have never had a chance to represent their countries, and a lot of players that we'd like to see play together to represent their countries. If they do things right, you could, like for Team Canada, for example, you could get, still get Crosby near the end of his career, but have him along with like McDavid and McKinnon and all these guys that are up and coming, Connor Bedard. And then, of course, for the States, you've got, Austin Matthews and maybe Patrick Kane still there. The Tkachuk brothers, Jack Hughes, Quinn Hughes, Adam Fox, all these guys. There's tons of so much talent. It's crazy. And, of course, the European countries would be pretty strong too. The Swedes, the Finns especially, they're never teams you can count out. The Slovaks, the Czechs, etc. So be interesting to see if this can be a done deal, and hopefully we can get confirmation soon that it's proceeding. And obviously in those years there likely wouldn't be an NHL All-Star game, but I think that would probably do good as well, because it would probably make the All-Star game not necessarily an annual event. And it could, help kind of change things up in that respect as well. So we'll see. A couple of reports around players retiring. One is a younger player that would kind of a little bit surprising in a sense, but Sven Beartschi announced a retirement today. So he's now officially part of the NHL alumni. He was drafted pretty highly. He was a Calgary Flames first-round pick in 2011, 13th overall. Ended up playing for Calgary, Vancouver, and a little bit with Vegas. Beartschi ended up appearing in 292 games over his career and putting up 138 points. So, if you think about it, that's only 12 years ago that he was a first-round pick, and he's already retired. So, I know Beartschi had his ups and downs, didn't really, make it in the NHL to the level he was probably hoping, or the level a lot of people expected of him, but he certainly did his best, and we certainly want to wish him the best in retirement. And I haven't seen confirmation from the team, but there's a lot of rumblings around the online world, especially with Twitter, or X, I guess it's called now, that Craig Anderson, which we know he's pretty much going to retire, or at least I haven't seen an official announcement, but word is that Craig Anderson's expected to sign a one-day contract with the Ottawa Senators, where he played probably fair to say, I think, the most of his career, and probably had the largest chunk of success of his career, that he's going to sign a one-day deal with the Sens and retire as an Ottawa Senator. At least that's what's going around Ottawa section of hockey Twitter. So we'll see if that comes to be. I would suspect that we may get word on that closer to the beginning of the NHL season, and that I would say that a good chance that maybe they have him come in and do that, and maybe honor him at one of their early games of the regular season. Wouldn't be surprised to see number 41, Craig Anderson, at least either go, I don't know if they'll retire his number, but I can see him at least going into the Ring of Honor at the very least. So we'll see what they do. He's arguably the longest tenured, most successful goalie that the Senators have had in their history. I mean, they've had goalies that have been, higher level. They did have Dominic Hasek briefly, and obviously had a few other goalies that have had a lot of success, over the time as well. But Anderson was there a long time, and holds a lot of the team's record. So I think you can make an argument that he's been the greatest Sens goaltender, at least in my opinion, at least on the long haul. We have another PTO announcement today as well. The St. Louis Blues have announced today that they've signed Isaac Radcliffe to a PTO. So, of course, the former Flyers prospect was let go and not given a contract offer, wasn't qualified, became an unrestricted free agent. Now, he also has a AHL contract with the Chicago Wolves. Now, of course, as we talked about before, a number of weeks or months back, the Chicago Wolves in the American Hockey League are now an independent franchise. They are no longer an NHL affiliated team. So players on that team are not necessarily going to be called up because they don't have an affiliation or two-way contract. They have AHL contracts. Now, they still have to follow the rules. They're only allowed to have so many veteran players and so many younger players, etc. So I would assume that he must have a clause in his AHL contract that if he's able to get an NHL deal, that he can be released from it, most likely. So he'll go to camp with St. Louis, and from there, if he does not make the Blues roster, they don't offer him a contract to stay in their organization, he can go back to Chicago. Now, I don't know. There could be clauses as well that he has to get a one-way deal. I don't know how the ins and outs, because obviously if they give him a two-way deal and want to send him to the minors, and or maybe they have to loan him to Chicago. I'm not sure how that's going to work exactly, but the Chicago Wolves AHL team is an independent franchise. It's the first time we've really seen that, and we're still kind of learning all the ins and outs on how that's all going to work. Now, I do want to talk about a variety of other things. Let's start here with the Leafs. This is not necessarily, a trade rumor per se. This is kind of talking with the Matthews contract a little bit further, and just what it means for Nylander and a little bit of Mitch Marner as well. As I mentioned, of course, Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick of Sportsnet are over in Sweden right now doing the NHL media tour, conducting a bunch of interviews. They released their first podcast in quite some time today. Of course, took a big chunk of the summer off, which is a lot of them do, and part of that was the William Nylander interview they conducted. So I get to listen to that, and obviously they discussed it as well beforehand. So there's the interview with him, and then there's another interview, which I haven't finished listening to the rest of the podcast. I caught the Nylander interview in their news section where they kind of analyzed it themselves, and I believe Rasmus Anderson's on the same podcast as well, in case you haven't caught it yet. I'll hopefully listen to his interview later this evening. But when it comes to Nylander and Matthews and the whole thing, I just wanted to analyze this a little bit further. So ultimately, we learned since the signing of the Matthews contract was announced yesterday that the Leafs were pushing for a 5-year term. And the Matthews camp apparently was really pushing for a 3-year term. They ended up compromising on 4 years. So it goes to show that Matthews really wanted even less term. I would suspect if he was going to take 3 instead of 4, that it was most likely a little bit higher of an AAV. But according to Elliot Friedman, what he was talking today in the podcast, saying how he's not surprised at all with the term. He's not surprised at all with the AAV. In fact, like he had heard before that the Matthews was going to become the highest paid player when this extension was eventually worked out, and that he wasn't going to be surpassing Nathan McKinnon's number by just a little bit, like we've seen with McKinnon over McDavid. It was going to be a huge jump. and that's what Matthews was going to be gunning for and what he was eventually going to get from the Toronto Maple Leafs. But of course, now that the Matthews extension's in place, there's just a few other tidbits there, of course, and I believe it has a full no move clause as well during the duration of the contract, which really shouldn't be a huge surprise because clearly the Leafs don't want to trade him anyways. But at the end of the day here, this does have an impact on his teammates. Matthews took a big chunk of money here. Sure, you could argue all what you want about whether or not it's a good contract, bad contract, percentage of cap, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, they have some other important decisions to make, and this is going to play a big role in how those decisions are made. Now, during the William Nylander interview, Friedman asked Nylander point blank a few times to discuss his contract. He really didn't want to get into it. He basically was like we've heard before. Nylander's pretty laid back, pretty calm, cool, collected. Nothing seems to faze him. He said he was basically just happy to be feeling good and getting ready for the season, working on some stuff. He said he's ready to hopefully have another career season. He said there's lots of time to get his contract done, absolutely no rush. You could tell he didn't have any kind of sense of urgency whatsoever, and he didn't really want to address the contract at all. He just kept saying that that's ultimately between his agent and the GM of the team, and that, he loves Toronto and hopes they can get everything worked out, but he wasn't really too concerned at this point. He was asked point blank by Elliott if he felt concerned at all over the summer, if he was going to be traded, and he said not really. Didn't really expand much on that question, but ultimately this does pose an issue here for the Leafs. We had heard before that, and Elliott talked about it again with Willie, saying that he asked him if he wanted to address the fact that the rumor mill suggested that he wants a minimum of $10 million on a contract extension, and he didn't really want to confirm or deny or really get into that at all. Again, he just deferred to that he's going to let his agent take care of the contract and talk to the GM, and hopefully it all works out. Today, we've heard long before from enough sources that there has to be some truth to it, that Nylander certainly was not happy with the fact of the gap between his contract and Marner and Matthews. Last time when Matthews signed, he got 11.634, and then Marner signs after, and he becomes basically an $11 million player afterwards as well because of the, obviously used Matthews contract as part of the comparables, and they didn't feel, obviously, that he was that far off from what Matthews brings to the table. And boom, contract is done. Willie got 6.9. So he's $4 million behind Marner and over 4.5 behind Matthews. Now, it's fair to say, I think, based on all of their performance, that they're obviously not all the same player. They all bring something different to the table, but I don't think there should be that big of a gap. And obviously, I think Nylander, from what we've heard, feels that way. And again, Elliott said to him that, we've heard that you're willing to take less on a contract if your teammates do. Anything truth to that or anything you want to speak to? And again, didn't really want to elaborate, just deferred contract questions, saying his agent and the GM will discuss it. So obviously not overly shocked. A lot of players don't like to discuss their contracts publicly, so we're not going to take too much from that. But I do think, from what we can gather here, it's fair to say that the $10 million asking price is not far-fetched at all. And if he turns around and takes his good old time deciding on an extension, and I can see him wanting more, to be completely honest. If you think about it, if Matthews signs for 13.25, Marner now is a year away. So Nylander's going to have to decide and sign if he's going to stay with the Leafs, if they can get it worked out, before Marner ever is eligible to sign. So we won't know that. But what do you think Marner's number is going to be? Because to be honest, predicting that for him and his camp is probably just as big a piece of the puzzle here. Because clearly it's important to all of them to be, not be severely underpaid compared to their teammates. So at the end of the day, if you look at the small gap between Marner and Matthews now, and it's fair to say that Marner has been incredibly productive to the point that he's going to be able to argue he should be getting pretty close to Matthews again. That if Matthews is getting 13.25, can you imagine Marner taking anything less than 12.5? I can't see it, to be honest. I think it's going to be more. I think you're probably looking at 12.8, 12.9. Close the gap here a little bit. Obviously Matthews is a center. Centers usually do get paid a little bit more. So it's probably not going to be too far off from $13 million. So if Matthews is 13.25, and let's say Marner's close to 13, do you think Nylander's going to want to be at 10? There's a $4 million gap now. Do you think he's going to want a $3 million gap? I don't think so. So for him to take anything under 10, to me, is absolutely non-starter. I think we can pretty much rule that out the window right now. I wouldn't be completely shocked if he wants way more than 10. Closer to 11, more than 11. I don't know. I mean, I'm not William Nylander. I'm not trying to speak for him. But if you look at the gap and the fact that they all use each other as comparables, I just don't see how the Leafs can afford to do that. It's just that plain and simple. So I do think, unfortunately, for Nylander to get what he wants, he's going to likely have to be traded. And now, unless he, ends up taking less, or if they do pay all these guys, then they're going to be that much more cash strapped to give them a proper supporting cast to be putting a product on the ice that can compete for a cup. At least that's my opinion. I know the cap story is going to go up, and it's going to go the next couple of years. We could see $3-4 million per season. So let's say in 3 years from now, they could easily be, $8 to $10 million higher. That's all fine and dandy, but if you think about it, I don't know how many years Marner's going to sign. Matthews just signed for 4. That's not that far away from the end of their terms. So, are they Marner or Nylander going to take a 7-8 year deal? I don't know. We don't know. I mean, if they follow suit here with Matthews, maybe they're going to want shorter term too. I mean, if you're willing to be confident, bet on yourself like that, maybe you can make more long term. But if you think about it, it was rumored before when Matthews signed his last contract that if he was going to go 8 years, that the command for the AAV was going to be around 13.8. If you multiply that out and look at what he's got over his 2 contracts that he's done instead of the 1 long term, it's really not that much different. So I know in some other sports, a short-term way of doing things seems to make you more money because you can keep taking advantage of getting a bigger raise sooner as the cap goes up. But the fact, the way things have been with a flat cap, I don't know that it really would have made a huge difference in the grand scheme of things this time around. But at the end of the day, hopefully Matthews will get a long-term deal on his next deal, which will take him hopefully close to the end of his career. So we'll see where that goes. But just to follow things up from the Matthews extension yesterday, and after listening to the Nylander interview today and listening to Friedman and Mayer kind of analyze things a little bit, it just seems to me that, because Friedman said that he sees Marner getting within a hair of Matthews. And of course, I just don't see Nylander accepting a $4 million gap again, because for him to get around $9 million, which is what the rumor mill suggests that the Leafs want him to take, I just don't see. It's the same gap that he is now. And I don't think it's fair to him. I don't think there's a $4 million gap in what he brings to the table, and I just don't see any way that he agrees to that. And if he's going to want $10 or $11 million, the only way they do it is either they sign Nylander and they trade Marner or something, but they just can't all make that much money. So to me, mathematics are going against them hardcore, and we'll see. I really think it will lead to most likely a Nylander trade. A lot of people in the NHL world seem to think he probably won't finish out the season in Toronto. But again, if they're going strong, having a heck of a regular season and poised to make a run in the playoffs, they're not going to want to move him either, right? So it's going to be an interesting story to follow, that's for sure. Now, a couple things we want to take a look at. There was a Sportsnet article from Ryan Dixon looking at some things that we might see, or that some players that could come available. One thing he speculated about was Flyers top centerman and former Selke nominee Sean Couturier. Wondering, obviously, with the Flyers going through rebuild mode right now, obviously Couturier's missed a lot of time, and there's a lot of question marks. But if he comes to training camp, looks good, has a good preseason, and into the season starts to look like he's healthy again and can play at the level he did before, if the Flyers would want to move him. Now, he's still early into a long-term contract, which comes with a lot of risk, but certainly if he can keep his back healthy and play to the level he did before, it would be a great contract to have if he can stay healthy. That's the question mark. And any team acquiring him is going to have those question marks. I mean, look at what happened to Philadelphia, for example, when they got Ryan Ellis. He played, a handful of games. It was never the same. And that's it. Now he's done. Could Couturier come back and end up with a back issue early on and be done? It's remotely possible. The back issues are difficult to deal with for sure. But I do wonder, though, that if he could be onto something. A team like Boston makes a ton of sense. Again, they would have a very difficult time cap-wise. They'd have to move out a significant contract to make that work. And unless they trade like a Linus Allmark or, something that's a little bit more substantial off their roster, I just don't know how they can do that. It's a perfect fit in a sense, but logistically would be very difficult to pull off. So I don't know, but I think if we get into the season and Sean Couturier looks strong and looks healthy and looks like he can play like he used to, I do think he's going to be a very interesting player to watch this season. There's also a lot of still talk I see in the rumor mill about a Calgary Flame Nashville Predator trade involving defenseman Noah Hanifin. We know that amongst the Flames pending UFAs, Hanifin is probably the most likely one to get traded first. At least that's the way things seem right now, because we know 100% he is not wanting to re-sign. With Backlund and Lindholm, there's still a possibility. I think Lindholm is the most likely to stay. I think Hanifin is the most likely to leave. And I think Backlund is somewhere in between. I think Backlund wants to see how the season goes. And if the Flames are doing well and training for the playoffs, maybe he'll re-sign. Maybe they'll talk to him about extending being captain. I don't know, but I know that Backlund is very much still undecided on defense from what we've heard. And right now the trade market for Backlund apparently is pretty light, which is surprising because he had a really good year last year despite everything the team went through. But a Noah Hanifin to Nashville trade does make some sense. To me, he's a very underrated top 4, or not even top 4, top 2 defenseman. I think he can play top pair minutes, to be completely honest. I think he goes under the radar a little bit, especially if he's a number 2 guy, and then like where the Preds have Roman Josi, who can be a clear number 1. I think Hanifin can definitely be a number 2. I think obviously if he was traded to the Preds, he may, or somebody may have to play their offside there because of the logistics, because the rumored price going back to Calgary, if a deal like that went down, would be younger defenseman Dante Fabro, who's a right-hander, a first-round pick, and maybe a prospect. That's the rumored asking price between those two teams if that deal goes down. I mean, to me, if they acquired Hanifin and having Josi there, who's also pretty good at moving the puck and good offensively, it opens the door for the Nashville to trade Tyson Barrie too. Now, there's a good chance Barrie could get dealt regardless, given the fact he's a pending unrestricted free agent, and given where he's at, at his age and career, and what else they have on a roster. I don't know that the Predators extend Tyson Barrie. I'm not really sure that they do. So I think there's a pretty good chance that Tyson Barrie gets traded sometime this year, either at the deadline, if not before. He could be a good piece to help another team going into the power play or playoffs, what have you, and then he can reevaluate his future next offseason. But I think that would open the door to a potential trade there as well and kind of change up the logistics of the Predators' blue line. I mean, obviously, Hanifin, we know, wants to play in the U.S. I think the Sabres are another team to watch when it comes to Hanifin. We've talked about that before. I do think they're a legit contender, but I keep seeing rumors about Nashville being in on this guy, so we'll have to see where that goes. So let me know your thoughts on all today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.